Thank you all so much for joining us for the Startup versus Small Business, What's the Real Difference workshop. Joining us today are Dr. Young Lee, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Research Director for Trojan Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Dr. Robert Rippey, Executive Director for the Blackfire Innovation Hub, Walter Carey, Goals Coach at US Bank, and Tashelle Lawson, President of FIG Strategy and Consulting. Today, you're going to learn more about what classifies a company as a startup versus a small business, learn what it takes to start both, and get some tips on how to successfully run and start both. So I'm going to have the panel first introduce themselves, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So I'll hand it over to Tashelle first.
Look at that, girl power, ladies first. Hi, everybody. My name is Tashelle Lawson. I am the president of FIG Strategy and Consulting. I am also a Las Vegas native, first generation, born and raised here. Very, very proud small business owner slash startup slash entrepreneur slash kind of a crazy person, because I think in order to be an entrepreneur or start up a small business, you have to have some degree of crazy. And I say that with much, much love. Everyone on this panel understands what I'm talking about. I'm very excited to be here with you all today and just share a little bit about my knowledge, my background. I started off in hospitality when I was 17 years old. My mom was a hostess. My dad was a chef. So hospitality is just ingrained into who I am. I'm probably one of the very few on the panel that does not have a formal degree. I worked my way up, and am very, very excited to be here with all of you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Tashelle. Robert?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be on the panel this afternoon. I'm Dr. Robert Rippey. I run the UNLV Incubator, powered by Hughes Center, which I'm in right now, which is kind of home turf for startups. That's what we live and breathe around here. I'm also executive director for Blackfire, which is our accelerator located out in Southwest Las Vegas at the Harry Reid Research and Technology Park. I've been at UNLV for 6 years. Prior to that, I retired from the hospitality and gaming industry. My last role was Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Las Vegas Sands Corporation. So you know that as the Venetian in the Palazzo. That was the end of a 25-year career in hospitality and gaming. And I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Robert. Young?
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. I'm the professor of entrepreneurship in the Lee Business School, and I also serve as the research director for the Trojan Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. The Trojan Center is basically has the goal to support students, faculty, and our community at large in their efforts as related to entrepreneurship and innovation. And for me, I do research primarily on investment decision making under uncertainty, which is obviously highly relevant to the context of entrepreneurship and innovation. And I also serve on the advisory boards of several startups, and I consult for companies and startups as well.
Thank you. And Walter?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Walt Carey, Customer Goals Coach with US Bank. I've been with US Bank since October of 2019. And prior to doing so, I worked in the B2B space for a global firm as a business coach and consultant. And then before all that, and dipping my toes into corporate America, if you will, I was in the Air Force active duty for 20 years and retired here at Nellis Air Force Base. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This is one of our first entrepreneurship workshops here at the Grad College, and we're so excited because so many students have reached out and said they're either interested in starting their own small business, like a practice, or ones that would just want to shake up the industry that they're interested in. So I think this is going to be a great panel today. So to get us started, the term startup has been a lot more popular recently, especially in the tech space, but is there a real distinction between what constitutes a startup and what qualifies as a small business? And if so, what is that difference? So I'll hand it over to our panel, whoever wants to start that off.
I'll go first.
Perfect for Dr. Rippey, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Tashelle. So from my perspective, a startup is by definition a small business starting, but not all small businesses starting are startups. I like to think of it best, and I heard a quote from Kevin Hale. Kevin Hale is with Y Combinator, one of the most powerful accelerators for startups in the world. And he says they associate the word startup with growth, rapid growth. And I think that's an interesting concept of not just being successful and opening and succeeding your first year and surviving to the second, third, fourth, but rapid growth. I think that's an interesting factor that he added into his definition.
I would agree with that. I would also add to it that startups typically seem to have this this let's change the world type of mentality, right? Like they're for the most part incredibly mission focused. They're not just wanting to have a business. There is a purpose. I'm making my mark on this world. There's this energy that it's just really exciting. That's, in my opinion, that's probably the biggest difference between startup and small business is it's that fire.
I would like just to add to what Robert and Shell just said. Basically, when we talk about startups, we kind of indicate that we're talking about high growth, maybe high uncertainty, and so they generally tend to have a major impact on the industry, the market, and the society at large. And so, for example, we talk about Airbnb for rental, Uber for taxi, Google for online search, Facebook for social media. On the other hand, when we talk about small businesses, think about plumbing business, salon business. So your goal there is primarily to earn a living, and I think that is a little different from the goal of a startup, which is to scale up and have a major impact. And because of that, I would also add that the strategy and the business model might also be different a little bit. And so when you talk about a plumbing business, for example, you're probably, when you start a business in plumbing, for example, you are looking for best practices, improving ways of doing business. By comparison, if you are going to start a company in the high-tech industry, there is high uncertainty with regard to both the problem you're trying to solve and the product solution. And so there is high uncertainty, and you expect to have high growth, of course. And that means that, for example, in the early days, you need to go through a lot of experimentation, so I would say their strategy and the business model might also be different. And of course, I think you will have questions about funding, how much funding they need, and that kind of stuff. The end state might also be different. For example, when you talk about a small business, it might be passed on to the next generation in the family. On the other hand, when we talk about startup, as Steve Blank put, it's a temporary organization with high growth. The company might evolve into a big company, and it might go public. It might be acquired by another established company, right? And so they're also different in those aspects.
I couldn't agree more with Dr. Lee and all the panelists and stuff. The only last thing I basically could add is here recently in Silicon Valley, the moniker that's been added to or associated with a small business has been quote unquote a lifestyle business, if you will. So that equivalent of, like, to your point, Dr. Lee, like the mom and pop and the smaller level, if you will, business aimed at, mainly staying, and again, not the gospel as I say this, but mainly staying as an LLC or perhaps an S Corp, whereas the opposite would of course be gravitating towards that C Corp approach.
Thank you all. So we have a very diverse set of panelists here, from those that teach entrepreneurship, those that are entrepreneurs themselves, and those that have consulted various entrepreneurs and businesses. What brought each of you to your work in this area? And did you receive any type of training for it, whether that was academic, non-academic? Hand it back over.
I don't mind going first. Should we just establish that rule that we're going to just do ladies first, guys? I'm fine with that. So we're cool. Okay. What was the question again, Navina? I have a very short attention span.
No worries. So I was saying that all of you have very diverse backgrounds. You're an entrepreneur, Tashelle. Others here teach it. Others have consulted entrepreneurs. What brought you into this kind of line of work or area? What did you have any type of training for it?
So I do not have a formal, I don't have a formal degree. But I will say my mom and my dad both were small business owners. So as a kid, my dad had a catering company, and then he also owned a comic book store, and got free labor out of his kids. But that's another conversation. And then my mom was a beautician, right? A cosmetologist. So she did hair and nails and all that stuff out of our home. And so there was always this spirit of entrepreneurship in our family, right? Of being able to control part of your income, to be able to control most of your life. So for me, it was very natural. I just happened to pick an industry that really valued working your way up, right? So I started in an industry that allowed me to grow and trust my business intuition. So I started off as a dispatcher at the Bally's Hotel and Casino, and there was an opening in the catering department, and so I transferred over to the catering department as a catering assistant and just worked my way up through the ranks. And the only reason I didn't pursue a degree was because I was advancing in my career. It wasn't actually holding me back. And once I got to a certain point, it was I'm either going to go after a VP position and work my butt off, as Dr. Rippey can probably confirm, or I'm going to take a shot and go out on my own. And I definitely saw that there was a gap in terms of helping small businesses understand brand strategy, helping small businesses understand how to really make their mark. Just from growing up in an environment where my mom just kind of did things. There were no official processes. There were no real procedures. Same thing with my dad. They had businesses, they made money, but they weren't as efficient as they could have been, right? If they'd actually had process, procedures, understood what their brand, what their mark actually meant. And so I saw that gap and just kind of gravitated towards being my own business owner. It's been quite a journey, I can tell you that. And I will pass it on to one of my co-panelists.
It's an amazing story, Tashelle. I have a similar one. My mother wore several hats. Two of them was matriarch of the family. Second one was floral business owner. So I seen it firsthand, and I remember reading Dr. Gerber's book, The E-Myth, and through that story, it was like he's talking about my mom, trying to figure it out, trying to systematize everything. She eventually exited and sold the business. But fast forward, as I mentioned, I served 20 years in the Air Force, and I was a weapons inspector. So quite naturally, that business coach or consultant. So it kind of fell into my lap on how I got, professionally where I'm at today. Education-wise, my degrees are in business. So I just found a gravitational pull, if you will, to the industry, and here I am.
Nice. And thank you for your service.
Thank you, Tashelle.
I have an interesting anecdotal story that kind of helps define my background and how I got involved in this. And it was when I was in the hospitality industry, and I was working at the time for one of the very large hospitality brands, and I was a senior marketing person. And this was in the late 1990s. And I had always I had a reputation of kind of being the non-status quo person. I was the one who challenged convention. I loved what Tashelle said a little while ago about changing the world. I wanted to change the world wherever I worked. And it just was a part of me that, do we always have to do it this way? Can't there be a better way? Well, to tell you this story, and I'll keep it very brief. You understand market segmentation, and customers come through different channels. And I had met a company in Seattle on a trip, and I was introduced to them through a third party, and they were bringing a very different type of customer or the channel to hospitality industry. And I remember taking it back to the headquarters of this company, which at the time was in Atlanta, and saying, hey, I want to sign a contract with them because they book travel online and book hotel rooms online. And I think this could be a really big thing because right now we're depending on travel agents and calling our call centers, et cetera. But I'd really like to try this. And I remember the executives in Atlanta telling me, no, you can't do this. That's not our customer. And we don't do business on the internet. That's not the type of customer that we're going to want in our hotels. And I said, this is ridiculous. Why not try it? Give me a chance. So I went above their heads, which was risky for me. And I went to a vice president and said, explained it to him. And I knew the guy fairly well. And he said, okay, you got 12 months. That's it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, you've got to answer for it. I'd be like, okay. So we did. And 12 months later, Travelocity was the #1 account of that company. They had no account with Travelocity to begin with. And I convinced them to try it. And that was just kind of my DNA, was like, yeah, this looks like it should work. Why don't we try it? And I ran into this brick wall of status quo as, no, we don't do that here. And 12 months later, this company is the #1 account producing room nights in that hotel. So, I guess the answer to my long-winded answer to your question, Nemna, was that there's always been this kind of idea in me to change things, to challenge status quo, and to not be afraid to take a risk. And I guess I carry that. I teach it now. I help I help support it, but it's always been a part of me.
Brilliant. Love it.
So for me, I would say I'm a scholar, by the way, and so my doctoral dissertation actually concerns how established companies make venture capital investments in startups, and so that's primarily motivated by a pervasive business challenge that is decision making in the context of entrepreneurship is characterized by significant uncertainty and information asymmetry. And so to meet those challenges, companies have to formulate strategies, and I study those strategies, such as when to initiate an investment in a startup, when to withdraw in the middle of the investment, and when to abandon, for example. But if I was looking up to anybody in my family for entrepreneurship, that would have been my mom. She worked in a hospital. My father is a medical doctor, very routine job. But she later on actually ran a very successful small business, not a startup, just to echo the topic today. And so, yeah, that kind of, I guess that's just my story.
Thank you all. And I do want to just say, I think many people do think of entrepreneurship as someone starting their business or establishing a startup, but you can be entrepreneurial within your own organization and shake things around like Dr. Rippey did, and be innovative. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. But I do want to go back a little bit to what Tashelle mentioned, that it has been a real journey. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some lessons you learned from starting your own business, or any tips or tricks you've obtained that you have for someone that might be wanting to do the same?
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like I should have a very clear list here. I would say the first is I would definitely want to emphasize what Dr. Rippey said, and that is having that spirit, right, of not accepting the status quo. Because as a small business owner, or startup, right, if you are in charge of running a company, regardless of what size it is, you have to be willing to shake things up, right? And just going with the flow and fitting in is not the way to go, right? Not being afraid of saying no to a client. That was a lesson I learned painfully early on after starting Fig, which is my second business. Because when you first start, there's this excitement, right? That you just want to do everything, right? You want to get started, you want to show everyone that you can do this. And then you're like, oh, I probably should have not done that with this client, or done that with this person. So I would say making sure that your mission is very, very clear, making sure that your vision is very clear, and that you stick to that. I think that more than anything, especially in those first years, that is the most important, because it's very easy to get distracted. It's very easy to jump onto trends. It's very easy to just lose your focus. And for me, if I were to give one solid piece of advice, well, one would be to have very thick skin. Two would be definitely make sure that you are on you know exactly what it is that you were setting out to do, and that you do not get distracted from that. Second, or I'm not going to start. I can't count. We're not going to count how many things I say. But something else would be to make sure that you have a really, really solid team. A lot of us in that startup phase are wearing a quadrillion hats, that when you bring someone on, you don't necessarily want to let go of, half of the quadrillion things that you're doing. You have to, right? So it's so important that you have a solid team, but also that team understands what the mission is, what the purpose is, and also helps to keep you on track. I mean, I could go on and on, but for me, those have been the most impactful. I also, much later on in life, did start investing in my education. So I've been taking executive education programs that have really helped me level up as a leader, and also get really grounded and focused on how we move this train forward, right? And we do that by staying on course.
Thank you so much, Michelle. To kind of expand on that from the rest of our panel, a lot of you have worked with organizations or startups or small businesses. Is there anything you've seen kind of like typical mistakes or great things they did that were trends across different organizations that you can kind of speak on for a little bit?
I worked with a young startup several years ago that were a group of UNLV students from the STEAM area. And it was really interesting. They're very talented, very smart. They had a really good idea that was a little bit ahead of its time. The challenge was that, and I love this because Michelle was talking about it there, they were all from exactly the same discipline. So they didn't have a diversity in terms of thought. They all thought the same way. And so when it came to the design and the engineering of the product, it was absolutely brilliant. It was breathtakingly beautiful and well done. But they didn't understand the first thing about business development and marketing. They didn't know how to take this product into the marketplace. And ultimately, they folded up shop. They ran out of capital and they stopped getting investment interest because they couldn't do that. They couldn't acquire customers. They didn't know how to get out there and convey what a great idea they had into a viable product that people wanted to buy. And I said, as I said before, they were a little premature because, as I see, and I don't want to go into the details of the actual company because it was students, but they were really good. They were just a little early because you see what they actually did in another company today that is incredibly successful. And they did it, and they took it to market and actually have become very successful with it. But I think their biggest weakness was they all looked at their technology and their problem from exactly the same perspective. They were all in the same field versus having a diversity of thought, a diversity of experience, a diversity of learning that, helps make things better.
Very well said.
That's a great point, Dr. Rippey. I mean, we've read that book, right? Jim Collins, Good to Great. Make sure you have the right people in the right seat on the right bus. Go in the right direction on top of that. Mm-hmm. But early on, to answer that question, from the SMB standpoint, small and medium-sized business owners, early on challenges I see often are they're getting in their own way of that trajectory and growth. And I'll be honest, a lot of it that I've seen has been ego. I can wear these hats. I can juggle these plates. I can do it all, really. And also that leads to, from an economic standpoint, and again, not the gospel, but just what I've seen anecdotally, is that they're looking through investments as far as, money and what it takes to grow, and they're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies in a sense. Mm. They're looking at this as a cost rather than through the lens of an investment coming out of my pocket. And I know that's easier said than done. Michelle can probably attest to this as a small business owner yourself, is that it's easier said than done to say, okay, I can't just look at this as a cost. This is going to cost me. No, you got to look big picture, be the visionary. And that's been, a lot of the challenges I've seen early on with SMBs.
I think you're spot on. I think that one of the biggest challenges in the day-to-day, right, is making a decision to work in or on the business and not in it as much. And so stepping over dollars to pick up pennies, I think, is probably the most common, because there's this mindset of, well, if I do it, then I can save X amount and we can stretch the capital, we can stretch this, we can do that. But back to, Dr. Rippey's point, you actually do have to have that diversity of thought. More importantly, you have to take yourself out of it as much. And I think you're spot on with the ego, and just also not knowing when to transition. There are times that I have to work in my business. It depends on me at this stage, but I definitely try to spend at least 70% of my time working on the business, and my team is working in it. And I think that's a big mindset difference.
Those are all great points. I would like to add to what you have all said, particularly with regard to ego. And sometimes we don't pay that much attention to the psychological aspect of entrepreneurship. But what's interesting is, right before the panel, I was revising a research project of mine, and that paper is actually about how narcissism affects entrepreneurs' learning. And so, yes, entrepreneurs do need to be somewhat narcissistic. You can be confident. You won't be beat down easily by all the obstacles, difficulties, and problems. But at the same time, you also need to make sure you're coachable. Okay, so if you're into the investment field, coachability is very important. That basically means that you need to learn, you need to adapt, you need to be flexible, open-minded. And that is also very important, because what we found out through our research, which is basically based on a survey of entrepreneurs in the IT field, is that the more narcissistic an entrepreneur is, the less likely they are going to learn from others, from their own mistakes. And so I thought that is a very important point. And of course, in addition to that, I think entrepreneurs tend to overestimate their own skills. This is obviously related to the point about ego and narcissism. They tend to underestimate the importance of the team members, the need for capital, the time that's needed to get anything done. And sometimes entrepreneurs also tend to overestimate the importance of the intellectual property.
I would agree with all that.
It's interesting, and as Dr. Lee makes some very, very good points, I think one of the challenges too with when you move on the spectrum towards with the ego and ultimately, hopefully not narcissism, but it's being transparent. Being transparent with your partners and your co-managers or your co-entrepreneurs is extremely important, especially when it comes to factors like cash flow. And income and sales and revenue and operating costs. Those are all important metrics for operating a business successfully. And transparency has to be a given in the startup environment or in the entrepreneurial environment. Otherwise, you're going to violate trust. And when you violate trust, you're going to create bad situations. And that's a surefire recipe for the failure of a team. Not even discussing whether you have the most amazing product ever devised on the history of Earth. You will fail because of your team, not because of the product. And transparency is a very, very important point, especially with people who are, less prone to being coachable, et cetera, is that you need to have that absolute feeling that I trust what you're telling me is the absolute and sometimes painful truth. I've as we all have spoken with entrepreneurs and startups that they're in a difficult position. They may be in a difficult position because of cash flow or because of some other regulatory circumstance, but being transparent is the way to find your way out of it.
Thank you all. I just want to take a moment to remind everyone you can unmute yourself if you have any questions for our panel, or you can just type it in the chat and we'll address your question throughout. So the next question that we have here is that the one similarity between startups and small businesses is the need to secure funding. Are there any differences in the challenges of finding financing for startups versus small businesses?
I would like to chime in. This is my research area, but I also look forward to thoughts from the co-panelists. In my opinion, given that small businesses are so different from startups, the source of funding, the need for funding are all going to be a little different. And so first talk about the source of funding. For a typical small business, for example, a plumbing business, you may not need significant external funding. You may be fine with bootstrapping, funding from family, friends, and founders. And on the other hand, for a startup to fuel the growth, you really need significant funding. So for example, Snowflake, a cloud computing company that Warren Buffett has invested in, when they got started, they, I think, raised a seed fund of less than $1 million back in 2012. Now, before they went public in 2021, they raised, I believe, more than $100 million for each round in the last few rounds. In fact, I think they raised close to $500 million in the last 2 or 3 rounds before they went public. So that tells you how different they are in terms of the, and so for the startups, the usual sources of funding include angel investments in early days, grants probably also, and venture capital. And so I would say the sources of funding might be different, than the need for capital might also be different.
Any other input from our panel?
Yeah, I would add to what Dr. Lee said. I think that source of funding is also related to the amount of risk. And generally, startups where it's dealing with a lot of unknowns, unknowns about the team, unknowns about the product, unknowns about the launch, unknown about the market assessment, are dealing with huge risk. And so you have their sources of funding are going to be sources that are somewhat risk-seeking. They're looking for the risky opportunities because they could see a potentially big payout. On the other hand, if I've written an exceptionally solid business model and I'm going to open an apparel business in a shopping mall that has a lot of high traffic in a great community, that's less risky. I probably am going to find more traditional sources of funding, especially if I have some sort of collateral that will help me to launch my business. So I think that relationship between source of funding and the amount of risk that is inherent in the idea is probably one of the factors that will drive you one direction or the other.
Thank you both. We did receive a question in the chat. So the question is that our panelists here are talking about the great qualities such as transparency, confidence, and trust, but they're also hard qualities to achieve or maintain. What are some tips you have to get there, and how can we maintain this attitude during the hard times that as a small business and startup we will most likely encounter?
I want to clarify, are we talking about personality characteristics that you need to possess? Anna, are you comfortable coming off mute and asking the question?
I'm not just talking about the narcissistic traits, but all of the good traits that a leader could have or should have. But at hard times, they're really difficult to maintain. And they're also very hard to achieve, to create that group or to create that environment of growth. Not only growth for the business, but to have a group of people, a team that it's mentally prepared. So my question is more of the mental part of the preparation of the team than the growth of the company itself.
Okay, I think I understand.
Okay.
I understand the question. So as a leader, you actually have to possess several qualities, and not all of them are charming, right? Not all of them are going to be qualities that I want you to know that I possess, but they are a requirement. And what I mean by that is I can be incredibly charming and funny and engaging and highly inclusive and really care, but then there's a side of me that has to drive a profit for my organization, right? And so that side of me has to be very, very focused. And sometimes my tone may not be as soft or as delicate as my team would like for it to be. That doesn't mean that I care about them any less. That doesn't mean that I'm not as concerned. This is a part of leadership. And so that, to my earlier comment about having thick skin, that is a requirement. Being a business leader is not always about having a team that loves you. It's just, it sounds great in theory, it's just not the reality. And so in order to prepare your team to embrace that, everyone again has to understand what the mission is, what the purpose is, right? And the problems that they're solving, and understand that sometimes there are going to be conversations that aren't going to be super high energy. It's, hey guys, we took a loss, we took a hit, we've got to get focused, or our competition is beating us on XYZ. That's a part of leadership. I will say that, and please, scholars, correct me if I'm wrong, that they don't teach you in business school. Like that is something that you have or you don't. With experience, you can actually gain that. And that is what my advice would be for sure, is you more than likely have a mentor. If you don't, I highly suggest that you get one, someone that you trust, someone that is respected, and someone that will guide you through all of that, because it's not about necessarily being soft or hard. It is about being a very consistent, trustworthy leader. And I definitely hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
That was a great answer. I mean, that's spot on right there. And going back to what I was saying earlier, is some examples I've seen with challenges early on with business owners is they getting in the way and not understanding the type of leader they need to be at the tip of the spear for their organization. You know, if your organization requires you to be a structural leader and that's not you, well, you got to put that ego aside and get out of the way, because you are the biggest hurdle in taking this business from a 1x multiple to a 3x multiple, for example. That's another thing I just would add and piggyback.
I think that kind of falls into the category of self-awareness. And whether that self-awareness comes from a mentor, as Tichelle was talking about, or it's self-awareness like Walter's talking about. I can remember times in my professional career before I became an academic when I was often coached by my mentor that, Robert, you're too much of a visionary. You're like 2 years ahead of your team and they never catch up with you. You need to throttle back a little bit and let them kind of catch up to where you are, or bring yourself to where they are, and then accelerate the whole team. And that was always something I took really to heart. It was like, you're right. You know, I would get frustrated that, don't you see what I'm talking about? Can't you see why this is going to work? And they'd be looking at me like, no, we don't see what you're talking about. We don't see that. So it's really kind of a self-awareness that real mentors and objective people are going to see this as an outsider and say, hey, you need to let's course correct some of these traits, because they're going to be important from a leadership perspective, like Walter was talking about, in order to make this entrepreneurial endeavor work. So these are great points.
So our next question here is, what are the end goals of a startup versus a small business? Can they ever be the same, or is there a distinct difference between the two?
Well, both want to make money. Right?
Well said.
I think at the end of the day, the one thing that they both have in common is, right, they both want to make money. They both want to be profitable. But again, I think back to that startup is that energy, that fire. Like, am I changing the world? Am I creating a new market segment? Am I creating a new industry? What am I doing? That's their driver. But make no mistakes, they certainly want to drive that to profitability. A small business owner may want to go from opening up or having one Subway, franchise to having 10 Subway franchises. It's still, they want to grow, they want to make money. I think it's definitely very individual, Nevna, like who and what their motivations are. Some may want to leave a legacy to their family. Some may want to sell the business. It's different reasons, but I definitely think that's the one they have in common.
I think that's a perfect point. Just to remind people, when we talk about entrepreneurship, most of us, we're still talking about business. Even if you want to start a social venture, not a nonprofit, you still need to make some money in order to sustain yourself. And so that's very important. In terms of the end state, I would say a plumbing business may remain a sole proprietorship, right? It may, grow a little bit with a few more employees, a few more partners, etc. And it can be passed down to others in the family. On the other hand, startups generally they have a goal of achieving high growth, making a major impact. And so again, let me give you an example. Back to Snowflake. I think in 2019, it had a quarterly revenue of about $30 million. And by 2021, that number has increased to more than $100 million quarterly revenue. And that is basically a year-over-year growth of more than 100%. So that tells you that in an ideal state, a startup really has high growth, rapid growth, exponential growth. And growth is a major goal. And but startup, because of the high growth, is also a temporary organizational form. Because with the high growth, you will evolve into an established large company. You may go public, you may be acquired. And so, just to echo my point earlier on, in that sense, Steve Bank was saying, startup, high growth, high potential, and of course, high uncertainty, right? Tends to be a temporary organizational form in that sense. In comparison, small businesses could remain for a long time. But I guess this is more kind of like academic now.
So our next question here is, how do entrepreneurs maintain work-life balance?
What a good question. To begin with, I think it's time contextual. Are you going to have balance between work and life when you're opening your store in the first 2 months of opening your store? Probably not. You're going to be spending a great deal of time out of balance. Hopefully, over time, you begin to achieve some sort of balance that's workable for you. But if not, I know people who've been entrepreneurs for 20 and 30 years who love what they do. They love going to work every day. They love it. It's their business. And they're there 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. I think that's the other kind of example I think about like an artist who wants to sell their art, right? Or make a living off their art. They obviously have a passion and commitment for art. So part of balance for them is to have this creative expression. Yet economically, they need to make an income. So the balance comes in this creative expression that they do in making an income to pay their rent and buy some coffee, by selling the art. And so that one is a little easier, I think, from a work-life balance because they're more tightly integrated than, say, the idea of opening a business or doing a startup.
As an entrepreneur, I would say work-life balance is, like Dr. Rippey says, there are times where I am incredibly balanced, and there are other times where I'm not. I think that, but I'm okay with that. I know that, setting up this next campaign, actually adding this new service, developing new processes, I'm going to be pretty insane for the next 3 months, 4 months, and I'm okay with that. Even if I took a couple of days off in that time frame, I wouldn't actually be relaxed because I would be thinking about the million things that I have to do. My balance is, once that's done, I treat myself to a week or 2 off, and I actually shut down, I reset, I come back, and I put my team through it all over again. But it's a matter of just understanding that work-life balance doesn't look the same for everyone, especially as entrepreneurs.
That's a great point. I would definitely echo to always remember that In order to help somebody put their mask on, you got to remember to put yours first, and focus on that. And then this is not a shameless plug, by the way, but maybe hire an executive coach or consultant, somebody there that's going to help you see the forest through the trees, right? And be there by your side. When you're at the tip of the spear, there's not a lot of people telling you what to do when you're running the business, and that's where I've seen the difficulty in that dichotomy of, said leader at the top having that ego and saying, hey, I can do it myself. I don't need to solicit the help of a coach or consultant or whatever it may be to help me see my blind spots. And look at those blind spots as not, deficiencies as a leader or deficiencies within your business, but glass half full, as areas of opportunity for growth, not only with yourself, but with your business. And when you grow as a leader, I guarantee you that correlates to your business growth and those that follow you.
Well said. I think your point of it can be very lonely in that position, right? Like the top spot can be very, very, very isolating. That's an excellent point. Well, thank you. And maybe I will call you. I'm sure that was meant for the students, but it's only there's one entrepreneur on here at least.
Thank you all. So our next question is that we've heard some of the terms such as like scalable or viable startup. Are there any specific decisions we should be making from the beginning, depending on which one of these we're interested in achieving?
Ask the question again, Nevin.
So like the difference between a scalable versus a viable startup, and depending on which one you want to kind of your end goal, are there any specific decisions you should be making from the beginning to get to either that scalable or viable startup when you're kind of in the beginning stages?
So I heard something recently that I thought was really interesting, and it directly kind of relates to what you're talking about, specifically as to scaling up. So scaling up generally refers to startups that have launched, they're making money, and they're going to go from here to here. They're going to the big growth, right? And the person who was doing the talk said something to the effect, and I don't remember who it was, otherwise I'd give them credit. They said something to the effect of taking your company from 1,000 customers to 1,000,000 customers is a very different company and requires very different strategies and possibly, and this was a really interesting point, different leadership. That a company that has 1,000,000 customers may need a CEO who has done that, who has been an experienced CEO for other companies and can manage workforces of 100 to 500 to 1,000 people, and not just the first 20 that got you to 100,000. That the complete, it's not so much that the culture of the startup changes, it's just that the business gets so big so fast that it may exceed the capabilities of the initial team. I thought it was really interesting, very relevant to the question you just said.
I would say there are two issues there. Okay, one is how can we tell whether my business is scalable? And second, how can we scale it up, right? And of course, those are related. And Robert has already spoken a little about it. How can you tell whether a business is scalable? This depends not only on whether you are addressing a big urgent problem that a lot of people are having, right? It also depends on external factors, environmental factors. As for scalability, how are you going to actually scale up your business? And Robert has talked about many of the things, important points. And I would say, going from 0 to 1 is very different from going from 1 to 100 or 100 million. And you do need to have the organization, the structure, the systems, the processes, the culture, etc. And so sometimes we call it a professionalization process. Once you have moved beyond from 0 to 1, now we're talking about from 1 to 100 or 100 million, right? That's the scale up process. And so that professionalization process is very important. And as a founder of a business, you do need to be careful during that transition, because you actually might lose your company, or you might be kicked out in that professionalization process. But that's another thing, you know. And of course, there are many other aspects that's related to marketing, operations, etc. Yeah.
A follow-up question is, can all business ideas be scalable, or is there businesses that are deemed limited? And if we can scale up any businesses, what is a way to do that?
I think scalability is a function of the size of the market, as Dr. Lee mentioned before. If you have entered a marketplace that has a total addressable market, which is a market term we use to describe the entire market, say the global market for your idea, is very, very big, then you should be able to scale to meet some of that market. On the other hand, if the total market for your product or services is relatively narrow, let's say that I want to open a retail store that sells collars for brown dogs. Well, that kind of is much more limiting, because I'm limiting the total market size that I have. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be successful with my store. It just means that the total market that I'm looking to attack is rather limited. And if I'm not successful, and if people with black dogs come by or people with poodles come by, I might not be able to serve them. So the idea is that it's more a function of the total market for the product or service, and trying to understand how that fits into your idea, and then how scalable. This is a question, this is really a good question. This is a question I ask the students in my lab, in the incubator, is tell me about how scalable you are, and tell me why. And that sometimes gets like this look of fear in our face. We've all done it in a class. When we get asked a question we don't want to be asked. But it's a great one. It's a very important one if you're going to be entrepreneurial, to understand what is scalability and how can it apply to your idea.
That is a great point. You know, you have to size the market, and you know how attractive the opportunity is, right? So let me put the question another way. Can we turn every business into a big business? The answer is probably no. Not every business is scalable, and that depends not only on the nature of the business, of the opportunity itself. It also depends on many other factors. And so, for example, if you are in a high-tech industry that has strong network effects, you can probably quickly build up the installed base and grow big, right? Once you have found out a repeatable, scalable business model, and so that makes, for example, scaling up much easier. But I would say not all industries have strong network effects or economies of scale, and so probably that could be a limitation in terms of the potential for scaling up the business. And also another thing is some entrepreneurs do not want to scale up their business, right? They want to be the king or the queen of the small kingdom. And that is totally fine.
Thank you. I do want to follow up, Dr. Rippey. You lead both an incubator and an accelerator. Can you explain to us kind of the difference between those? What purpose does each serve? And if students do want to get involved, or they have an idea, which stage should they kind of utilize either one of those?
So they're very closely related, and they overlap. Think of them as leaky buckets, but one pours into the other. So as we define it, an incubator is kind of the early stage. It's when you develop your idea. I took this entrepreneur class. I came up with this great idea, and I really think it's a good one. I think I could do something with it. Well, what you do with it is what incubators do. We help you to form a business model. How are you going to actually do this? We're not going to help you to design the product, but we're going to help you figure out How do you enter the marketplace? What kind of business structure do you need? How do you get capital? What is capital? What type of sources are there? How do you get investor interest? What are some of the regulatory issues you might face? And so that happens in incubators, kind of understanding how to be a startup, if you will. Accelerator, you already kind of understand that, and you're looking to enter the market, or you've entered and you're trying to get what's called traction. You're trying to get some sales moving to show that your product can be successful. So the relationship is, like I said, it's kind of a leaky bucket, right? The top one is the incubator. These are ideas coming out of the Trojan Center, coming out of the College of Engineering, and coming out of the School of Architecture or Fine Arts, and they come in here. And some of them leak out because they're so good, they can go right to market right now. And some of them, like, I don't know how to form a business. I don't even know the types of business. Okay, well, let's help you with that. And that's what happens. And then we send you to the accelerator, which allows you to gain some investment capital and then enter the market. So we have both. They're kind of working together in unison, but at the same time, a little bit independent. We're fortunate because that's part of our ecosystem here at UNLV that we've been building over the last 3 years. And this is a concerted effort. It's not just any one person, but Trojan Center has been a big part of it. You know, Blackstone, who's a company that Trojan Center brought to the table, you know, Caesars Entertainment, which is our co-founder in the Blackfire facility. These are all companies that have played big roles in helping this happen, but that's essentially how they work.
Thank you so much for that explanation. So we're at the end of our time here today. We do have one last question I'd like to ask that's in the chat, and that is, do you have any daily habits or rituals to help you operate at your best?
Ooh, this is a good one. I can start. And I just looked at it. I took a page from Brian Tracy / Mark Twain. Eat the frog. So I make a list, right? And at the top is that frog. It's that thing that I'm always turning my back to, running away from. But I'm very task oriented, as you can imagine, right, with my military background. So it's definitely taking that eat the frog approach for me.
I have I wouldn't call it a daily. It really depends on what I need to accomplish for the day. I grew up on hip hop, so when I'm going into a meeting, I need to close something, I put on like the loudest, funkiest hip hop song in my iTunes to just get me pumped up, and that always works. And yeah, other times it's like I need to just shut down, and so when I need to kind of clear my head, like I will do after this call, is I normally will just go and have a glass of bourbon and just download everything that I've worked on today, things that I notes and I need to work on and adjust, and that definitely keeps me honest. I don't know about the best, but it definitely keeps me honest.
My daily ritual begins the same way every single day. So I practice mindfulness, which is a reflection back on my own mind, thinking about what I'm thinking about, and trying to play some kind of observer role in my own pattern of thoughts. I think a lot of time that leads to a lot of curiosity on my part. Why am I thinking about that? But at the same time, I like what Walter said, you know, it helps to ground me by clearing my mind out and allowing me to refocus, to kind of recenter at the beginning of the day, saying, okay, mind is clear. What's important today? Let's go do those things.
Well, I didn't expect that you would ask a professor, right? But anyhow, I give you my answer. I would say one of the luxuries of being a professor is that sometimes you can choose to work when you feel you're at the best, right? That's a luxury that many others don't have, many other professions don't have. But other than that, as far as the daily habits or rituals are concerned, I would say you try to have a schedule and have a list of priorities, and then you try to stick with that. Another thing is, you know, having small victories, small accomplishments every day really can make a big difference, can make you feel so much better.
Yeah,
Thank you all. Before we end today's session, I just want to give a huge thank you and shout out to our panel for your time, your expertise, sharing your experience with us today. Thank you for our participants for joining us today. Before you log off, if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes just to fill out this quick workshop feedback survey, which helps us as we plan workshops for you every semester. I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Great
you.
panel.
It was.
Bye, everyone.